Welcome to today's XMPP Office Hours talk. I'm Fabian Sauter and I'm going to introduce you today how to find Windows and XMPP, and by the way, build a modern-ish looking Windows XMPP client for Windows. I have a couple of words from my side. I'm currently a computer science student in Germany, more concrete in Munich, and I'm finishing up my master's, and usually my daily driver system is a Linux system, to be more concrete a Fedora system, and I'm usually developing only for Linux with GTK and GNOME. So that's quite different from my side, and yeah, let's get started. I'm gonna use it today how to develop and fight Windows at the same time. So what is UWPX? UWPX is my Windows 10 client for sending XMPP chat messages and connecting to XMPP accounts. It is available for all Windows 10 devices. That means it is available for IoT devices, which is, for example, a Raspberry Pi. It would be able to for Windows mobile phones, for PCs, Xboxes, and HoloLenses. Here you can see a couple of screenshots from the PC version with light mode, dark mode. Then it also runs on the HoloLens, like I've said earlier. Here's an example of that, how you connect the HoloLens, and then it looks something like this. You please ignore the black background. If you make a screenshot on the HoloLens, it blurs or makes the complete camera capture black and only shows the actual image. I don't know why. Then it even runs on mobile phones. That's my trusty old Windows 10 mobile phone, and it even runs on that. It looks something like this on this one. And yeah, basically it runs on all Windows 10 devices which have a Windows 10 version which is newer than 2019. So sadly, my Windows phone, my old trusty Windows phone, doesn't support it anymore because the last update it got was in the end of 2017, the last real update. So I had to deprecate the client for Windows phones. What are the features of this client? Well, basically, obviously, it is able to chat. You have some kind of typing indicator. Since quite recently, you can have presence indication. You can change your own presence and all the basic stuff there. You can send Wemo encrypted messages most of the time if it's working. More on that later. You can manage fingerprints from those people. And currently, I'm supporting Wemo 0.8.1. So it's the most recent Omom standard, and why I support this one we will see later. Besides that, it obviously also supports group chats and has multi-account support. It has a nice new user onboarding experience, so new users get introduced to what is XMPP, how they can set up an account, how they can log into an account. And if they don't have an account, they can even register for an account, because there I'm using the curated server list, which is provided, and show the user there a couple of suggested servers, and then they can decide on one and click on the register button, and the register button then brings them to the register page of this server provider. I decided against to implement the in-band registration because most of the server providers don't even support it, and so it would be wasted resources. Besides that, there's a far longer list of features I'm supporting. If you would like to have a look at that, just visit the GitHub site or webpage. You can find this one in the shared notes. Now, just a couple of fancy statistics about the client. Well, I have currently roughly 237 concurrent users per month. It says daily users 9. That's completely wrong. And I don't know why in the Windows Store publication website it says something completely different. But the only thing that actually matches is the monthly concurrent users. Besides that, the most common languages my client has used is English, German, and Russian. And usually, user has roughly between 2 and 4 sessions per day, and it also makes sense. The session duration is between 0 and 10 seconds, which actually makes sense because you receive a message, reply to a message, and then close the client again. So yeah, just so much to the statistics. Let's continue with a little bit of history. that's basically an overview of about all the releases I have done for this client. I started developing it in the end of 2017, to be more concrete, in September 2017. And the first version, which I actually got released, was in the 1st of January of 2018. And then I tried to continue with a monthly release schedule. And so each green dot here represents a monthly release. And a red dot here is a skipped month. So I was mostly successful with that. So why did I decide to build an XMPP client, and why did I decide to build a chat client with XMPP? Well, like all great stories, I and a friend of mine were sitting in the university in a boring maths lecture, and we were starting to talk about interesting stuff, about technology and so on. So then my friend told me, well, I have found this really new cool application. It runs on my Android phone. It's called Conversations. You are able to send XMPP messages with it. And XMPP is basically the protocol which was used by WhatsApp in earlier days and is completely open source and it's nice. Why don't we talk with each other only over XMPP? Since it's open source and we don't have to use WhatsApp anymore. So then I said, oh, right, cool. Just let me get out my trusty old Windows phone and get in the store and search for an XMPP client. And there was actually one, which I was quite surprised of. It was called IM+. So I was quite happily downloading it and starting it, and then it crashed. Okay, then I thought, yeah, well, give it another try. Went back, started it again, and it crashed again. Then I thought, okay, that's quite usual behavior for Windows Phone apps. They usually crash, even the browsers or the system utilities crash from time to time and quite regularly, so just try it again a couple of more times. So I started again, and it crashed again. Turned out this IM Plus messenger was developed for Windows Phone 7, then ported to Windows Phone 8, and in Windows Phone 10 it broke and never got maintained again. And since it wasn't open source, or I didn't find any way where I could find it open source, I was unable to send message. Was unable to use it on my Windows 10 mobile device. Then my friend said, "Well, why do you use such a stupid phone where you're unable to install basic applications like an XMPP client or a chat client?" Well, then I said, because I really love the operating system and I really like how it looks. And then he said, well, Self is the computer client. Why don't you build your own XMPP application so we can chat with each other? Then I said, well, challenge accepted. And 2 days later, in the next boring maths lecture, we again sat next to each other. And then I went, let's have a look. I implemented my first version of my XMPP client. It looks something like this. And I'm able to send messages from you, and you are able to send messages from me. I'm able to use presence tag. I'm able to see your presence. You can change my presence and so on. And I can manage my rooster. So now what? Then he said, well, looks quite nicely, but what happens if I send you a message in the background and the app is not running? Then I said, oh, well. And there was other stuff like sending images also, which wasn't supported back then. And yeah, for all of those who know, if you have ever worked on a mobile device or developed an application for a mobile device, the operating system itself kills or suspends applications which are running in the background quite frequently to save battery power. So you need some kind of push server to send messages. And that's the reason why I didn't receive messages in the background for quite a long time. Then a couple of months later, in the 1st of January 2018, I released the first version of my client. And by the way, the first commit was on the 9th of September 2017. And just a side note, we had maths lecture between 8:15 and 9:45 in the morning. After that, I went home and directly started working on my client. And here you can see the old logo of the client back then. So, and then the first version was on the 1st of January, and it looked something like this. You were able to send chat messages, you were able to view your subscriptions and Disco stuff. You were able to log in, and do basically the same things I already had after 2 days, but more robust and actually able to be published to other people. After that, I continued, and then a couple of days later, in the end of this month, I released the second release of my client with basic MOOC support. You were able to discover group chats, you were able to join them, you were able to create them, and that was inside the second version. After that, in the next version, I extended the MOOC support a bit, added roosters, added bookmarks, I added managing members, changing settings of the MOOC, of the group chat, and so on. After that, I started working on the UI in the next couple of releases a bit and added better bookmark support. And in version 7, the first time Microsoft came into play, because I successfully published this release because I had a nice idea, since people were asking me how they could support me because they really liked the client and it was the only one available for Windows Phone back then, and is also today. Then I decided, since I already have seen it in a couple of other open source applications on Windows, that they added such in-app purchase buttons where you could support the developer by, for example, spending him a cup of coffee or giving a meal, paying him for a meal. And this worked fine. I added this stuff, published it to the Microsoft Store. Later this month, I had to publish a quick hotfix for stuff, and I got this message. Well, your app needs some attention. Turned out they rejected it because I had in-app purchases. And turns out you are not allowed on the Windows Store to have in-app purchases without any reward for the user. So you have to give the user at least some kind of badge or something else which he gets to be able to have an in-app purchase. I don't know why, and I didn't want to do any kind of badges or something like this because, well, why should I? So I decided to switch over and go to PayPal or LibrePay, so people could support me there. And then I still, after I removed everything, had still in the store this free plus icon. So the application basically was still free, but it has noted, well, there are in-app purchases. And then I tried to get rid of that because actually nobody ever tried it because it was only up for such a short amount of time. And asked Microsoft if they could remove it because I removed that. Then they said no. Then I asked why. Then they said because your app has in-app purchases. Then I said no, because I removed it and it was an old version. Then I said, well, some people could have this old version. Then I showed them nobody has this old version because everybody updated already and nobody actually bought it. Even only I have bought it once to test it. And then they said, no, you have to live with it. And that's the only answer I got. And why, I don't know. And so during the complete alpha phase of the application, I had this free plus. Also, I didn't have any in-app purchases available. After that challenge, I started working on Wemo. With the first version of Wemo, I was able to generate keys, show them as fingerprints. And the funny thing with that is, I started implementing Wemo with version 0.3, the encryption, and for that you need some kind of, libsignal library. So then I went to the search for a libsignal library for C#, which the client is written in. Turns out there are quite a lot of them, but none of them are compatible with Windows Universal Platform because it was back then a completely new platform, nobody was developing for it, and you had to recompile or change system calls to be working on Windows Universal Platform. Then I finally found one which was quite outdated and was basically a copy-paste of the Java code and rewritten in C# with an automatic tool. Well, and the library worked most of the time, and I'm sure it has quite a lot of flaws and security issues, but I was so happy that I found one and didn't have to port it myself that I used it for the first couple of months of the app's lifetime. And this release also got text highlighting, it got basic push messages. If you, for example, send a message in another chat, you will receive a push message, and it got message carbons. Then a month later, I finally published the first working Omemo implementation. It still was breaking sometimes because I didn't really understand the XMPP, and it was really strange to me since I never have worked with some kind of encryption before. After that, I was so frustrated with all the Omemo stuff that I started to have a look at the user interface, because I noticed, oh, actually people are using the application and they're complaining about the ugly user interface, that it doesn't really match Windows. So I decided to update the user interface, add all this new fancy Windows acrylic background which shines through. And yeah, here's another example, and that's really the point where I started seeing a point into doing user interfaces, because before of that I thought of user interfaces always as rather boring stuff, and I didn't want to do anything with them. And that's actually the time when it changed my mind that it could be quite rewarding, because, for example, if you work the whole time in the background in your back end, you don't really see a change. And if you do that for a long time, it could be frustrating. And then if you work in a user interface, if you change the background color, for example, you immediately see a change. And that's the thing I really like about the user interfaces. And I started to read myself into that, and how colors work, what is consistent color generation, what colors are available, how to do effects, how to use shaders, and so on. After that, I continued working on the Omemo implementation and had a small breakthrough with that. So it was working more of the time. And I don't know if you know, but Windows has quite a nice emoji picker. If you press the Windows key and the dot key, you can bring up this really, really nice emoji picker. One problem with it, you can't programmatically call it. I think this is a really big oversight in my eyes. So even if you could simulate the Windows key and dot pressing by application, but there are limitations in place from the Windows Universal Platform framework, so it doesn't really work reliable. And even if it's working, the position of this overlay for the emoji picker is quite of its rather broken then. So then I decided to work on my own emoji picker, which was also quite an interesting experience, because I started parsing all the emojis from the Unicode Foundation and adding them to my own font here, and then showing them in a rather performant manner in the user interface. Because if you are showing emojis, well, you don't only show 2 emojis, you have to show then thousands of emojis at once. So you have to think a little bit about performance. And that's what I tried to do there. Yeah, and after that, I continued redesigning the user interface. There, Stephanie gave me a lot of tips and had me design, for example, the background here, or design for me the background here. And she was quite a lot of help with that. And then the next release got the new logo, which you can see here, and finally the first working UI redesign release. Yeah, there, and in the settings, I even added small indications what the settings actually do, because I find it quite useful if it's explained with some kind of GIF or something like that, what the settings are actually doing. And at the top, you can see even Omemo. Since this release, you are able to scan QR codes with your camera, and it automatically validates the fingerprints. Okay, then let's continue. The end of 2019 introduced to me the end of Windows Phone, because I had quite an unpleasant experience. I was at the Sprint in Berlin, and there I wanted to take back the train in the evening, and I thought I could rely on my phone to remind me 1 hour early so I don't miss my train. But there was the time change from summertime to wintertime, so the calendar broke and reminded me 1 hour too late on my actual train departing, and so I missed it and had to, instead of taking the train from Berlin to Munich, which takes only 3 hours, I had to drive overnight with a 10-hour ICE from Berlin to Munich. And that's the point where I said to myself, okay, this operating system is dying, Microsoft isn't working on it anymore, so I will also abandon it and switch phones. Yeah, and the final release of the final release Windows Phone got was with MOOC, the group chat, members management, and you were able to invite people to group chats. Okay, then over Christmas and in the beginning of 2020, I decided, okay, I remove all the Windows Phone compatibility code, and the Windows Store itself got really bad. At one point, it even didn't show images, or the downloads were failing all the time. The search was continuously broken, and the Windows Store was just abominable. And I think, it was roughly 6 months of a broken Windows Store which we had, and it wasn't even showing screenshots of applications you wanted to download since quite recently, since they published a new version of the Windows Store. So, I decided I need my own solution, and I wrote my own installer for Universal Windows Platform apps. And one problem with that, if you download this installer, the installer is roughly 400 megabytes in size. Well, why is this the case? Well, basically, if I'm building a Universal Windows Platform app, it bundles everything. And since the API is rather limited, how you can interact with those bundles, and it's a proprietary part, I have to bundle all the dependencies and everything with the installer. And since I'm not only building for example, x64 systems, but also for 32-bit systems and for ARM systems, this bundle gets quite large, and so we are ending up with roughly 400 megabytes each release. Yeah. And just a small side note, I was trying to build, since Microsoft, I didn't know if you heard, but Microsoft had with Qualcomm such an initiative where they were publishing Windows on ARM laptops, and funny thing is, you can't cross-compile for those. If you would like to cross-compile, or would you like to build your UWP application for such a laptop, you have to own one of those laptops. You have then to build on this specific laptop your stupid application. And Microsoft doesn't even offer some kind of build service for those, like they do it for all the other platforms. So, I don't own one of those, so I can't build for this device or for this device family. And even if I would try to use a virtual machine, there's the problem. You are emulating a virtual machine for ARM, and then inside of that you have to run Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a 64-bit Intel application, so it will be emulated again, and then on top of that you have to build the application. So I measured it one time, it took me 2.5 hours to build a single debug build of my application in this stack of virtual machines and emulation. So that's quite stupid, I'd say. So the easiest way would be just to allow people to cross-compile for ARM 64 like they allowed for ARM 32-bit. Yeah. And then they wonder why nobody publishes applications for Windows apps. Okay, enough of the rant. We will continue with the next release. I decided, cool, there's this new operating system which Microsoft is developing. It's called Windows 10X. It has quite a nice interface. It supports multi-screen devices, and I optimized my application for that. For example, you can see here the application before was not spanning everywhere. The chat was spanning over two displays, and after that it was spanning only over one display. And later it turned out that Microsoft decided to drop Windows 10 X, and all the work I done was for nothing again. In this month I also started doing more UI stuff and started working on the push server so I could receive background notifications in the application. I decided to write this push server in Python. Yes, in Python. I decided to write it multi-threaded in Python. I think everybody who knows Python a bit knows that Python isn't really multi-threaded. If you create a new thread, it still runs only one thread, so it's quite limited. But the basics worked, like you can see on the bottom right side. I get push notifications, but then I tried to integrate an Python XMPP library, and it turned out that all Python XMPP libraries require asynchronous code. And if you know a bit about Python, you shouldn't really integrate asynchronous code with threaded Python. So I basically had to rewrite everything, and since Python wasn't the right choice anyway, I decided to rewrite everything in C++ in a couple of later releases. But first of all, I was quite that frustrated that it didn't work out like I planned, and changed courses again and continued working on message archive management and incremental chat loading, so you are able to infinitely scroll your chat messages to the top, which was quite a hard task because turns out the Windows list view control, which you can see there, isn't really intended to be incrementally loaded. I think that's quite a big oversight. After that, I again continued working on Omemo. I updated my Omemo implementation to 0.7. And why did I update it? Well, because I was using the most used database NuGet package for Windows Universal Platform, and it was almost the only one which was available and only remotely up to date. And the database decided always, if I say, hey, I need you to insert 200 keys, 200 pre-keys, for example, in the database says, do I have to store them? And the next time it loses half of them. And this even went so far that it lost chat messages, and I don't know why. Then I investigated that a bit and found a couple of breaking bugs in this NuGet package, which I was using SQLite. Submitted them to the author, but the author didn't reply, and even other people actually tried to reach this author, but they without success. So basically this library is kind of broken, but it was the only one really available. Yeah, back then. And then I finally found an alternative because Microsoft decided with their grace to port their Entity Framework core to the Windows Universal Platform. And then I finally had an alternative, and then I switched to the Entity Framework for storing data. Only one problem. Microsoft had a great idea. Well, we have now Project Reunion. We are merging all the .NET libraries and APIs and everything else. Well, all your old libraries are now incompatible again, and you have to update to your new library. And now I'm using version 3.0 of the Entity Framework, but the most current version is version 6.0. Yeah, at least this version 3.0 is a long-term release, and I'm getting more or less regular bug fix updates for it. So I'm quite happy at least with it, and the performance is quite good, so what matters? And with that, I decided to update my Omemo implementation to 0.7 because I saw there was an update and it required you to basically write your own libsignal library. And with that, I decided, well, cool, I can throw away this old scrappy libsignal clone I was using back then and write my own. And that's the point where I'm currently. I wrote my own Wemo library. And by the way, if you are reading the XAP and that states you don't really have to read this libsignal protocol, you have to read it. If you don't read it, you don't get half of the stuff. And there are other small things broken or missing in the XAP, and I'm currently working on an update for that. So much to that. Then in the next couple of releases, I continued working on other stuff. I added the curated server list, which guides users through typing indicator, and after that, the first beta release got released, and I rewrote the complete push server in C++. Finally, a nice programming language. It runs on Linux, and it works quite nicely. It's nicely multi-threaded. It's able to handle a lot of clients at the same time. Yeah, and that's currently the point of the beta release. And yeah, I added this guide through if people are new to XMPP. Okay, let's get to today's end. The current version supports more or less Windows 11, and with Windows 11 there came a lot of rounded corners again. I'm really a fan of sharp corners, and now Windows decided, okay, we throw that all aboard, and now everything has to be round. So in the last couple of versions I updated everything to fit Windows 11, and updated also the Omemo implementation to 0.8 because, well, it was only a minor change. Yeah. Looks something like this, and I even added indicators if your contact supports the latest Omemo standard, because as far as I'm aware, I'm currently the only client which supports version 0.8 of Omemo, and that helps users quite immensely. That's something we can skip. So let's continue with my further plans. Well, basically my further plans are to implement those missing steps, and in the near future I would like to optimize more for Windows 11. But currently I don't have a Windows 11 capable device, so that's a bit hard for me. And since I'm not allowed to update my virtual machines, since they don't have a TPM module, it's also quite hard. Well, besides that, in the near future I would like to implement stream management, so I'm able to quickly resume sessions without having to do the whole handshake, which makes receiving chat messages in the background from the push server quite much easier and in a more energy efficient. Then a few MISC pointers. Well, that's basically how the Windows Store now looks. I think it looks quite nice, and you're even able to see images of your applications. You might think that's something basic, but I'm really appreciating that right now. And then one last rant, the Windows Partner Center, that's the place where you upload your applications to be submitted to the Microsoft Store, is frequently broken. And it's, for example, here, if I click on, I would like to see some kind of diagnostics about the application, the website is again broken, I think, for 3 months now, just continuously reloads. And even if you would like to upload an application, that's not guaranteed to work, because it's also quite frequently broken for a couple of days. So think again if you would like to develop applications for Windows. The only reason why I'm doing is because it's something completely different in contrast to my usual work, where I'm usually working on Linux with GNOME, GTK, and C++, and now that's basically something completely different. And on that final disappointment, I will conclude this talk, and if there are any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. So let's see, get back to the chat. There it is. Okay.
Many thanks, Fabian. Interesting talk, and also already said thanks for fighting that front. I think it's really important, and as you said, yeah, you're the kind of only one doing this here, so that's really great, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
There are the first questions. You can use your voice or your questions in the public chat. Then I think Fabian, you can read yourself that, right?
Yeah.
So that's it.
Genau. When is it out of beta? Well, I plan to be out of beta at the end of next year. Well, initially I planned to be out of alpha in I think March 2018, and then release the final product at the beginning of 2019. Well, it turns out now I'm 4 years in and finally got a working beta. But there are still a couple of things, important things missing. For example, stream management, proper working Omemo support, uploading images is kind of weird right now, and other such stuff, which is required in my eyes to be a called release candidate. Omemo 0.3, never. That's something I won't implement again, because I had quite that unpleasant experience back then. And let me say to you, the new Omemo accept is far more comfortable to implement and to maintain, at least in my eyes. Are you thinking to also implement a sticker accept at some point? Yes. I'm using Signal most of the time because I'm having an iPhone, and I really like reactions, and that's the next thing I would like to implement also soon. And besides that, stickers. I think that's a nice topic for if I'm frustrated again from developing in the backend. I will probably have a look at stickers or reactions or something like that. Yeah, yeah. Jingle is also a plan I would like at long term. I think that's really a long term plan to also support video calls, audio calls, which are encrypted through Wemo and Jingle and so on. Let's see how far I get. Okay, then I think that's all with the questions, and I can just quickly switch over. Don't need this one anymore. Don't need them. And just give you a quick look of the actual application. Starting, it's quite a bit slow right now because I'm using a debug build, so be aware of that. Usually, if you download it from the App Store, it's quite blazing fast, but because I'm using debug build here, it might be slow in some edges. Then, yeah, well, there's the newbie introduction, and then, well, that's basically the chat application. You can see here that's the com team chat, MOOC. You also can see, for example, here, that's the current contact information page. And also one thing that's currently missing, I don't support profile pictures at all. So that's also a thing in the near future, which I would like to implement before I would be able to call my application stable, because that's quite necessary in my eyes. Yeah, besides that, what else can I show? Well, you're able to change the presence. Let's have a look at the that's basically it. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I think the experience is quite different in Windows. If you are spoiled from Linux or Android, Windows is quite different in some cases. I think the most important case is on Windows, everything you have to pay for. And if you don't want to pay for something, well, it's full of adware, spam, and so on. And that's really something I hate on Windows. Okay. If there are not if there are no questions anymore, I think that's it from my side. Oh wait, one is typing. Yeah. At the beginning of starting this project, I didn't think this was quite so much work. I thought, well, you just send a couple messages, receive a couple of messages. What could be so hard on that? Then you send images, manage your subscriptions. Well, what could be so hard on that? Turns out I'm now 4 years in, and well, basically every minute in my free time goes onto that project, and I only have this feature set quite stably working. So yeah.
You might have mentioned this in the talk, and I missed it, but did you write your own XMPP implementation, or were you using an existing one for Windows?
Initially, I tried to use an existing implementation for Windows, but it turned out they were all incompatible with UWP, the .NET framework there, so I started to write my complete own XMPP library. So basically everything in the client is written by myself except the database and some cryptographic routines, which I didn't feel to implement because of all the reasons like you make errors, security issues, you have to maintain those, yeah.
As a follow-up then, were there any parts of the XMPP implementation that you found particularly nice to work with and easy to build, and or any that you found especially frustrating and difficult to build?
Especially hard. I think the hardest part currently was Omemo, because it's not hard in doing, but it's hard in getting into it. You have to read basically all the cryptographic stuff, get it right, and hope everything works. Quite nice, I think. Yeah, basically chat state. I was quite astonished how easy it is to send the chat state or confirmation messages if somebody has received your chat message and how to display those. That was quite a pleasant experience. Okay. Then I think.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, Fabian. It was a great talk. If anyone else would like to give a talk for the office hours, I've put the sign-up link and the schedule in the shared notes, and those will also be on the comment if you're watching this, or in the description if you're watching this later on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you do have any more questions, feel free to paste them. But otherwise, thank you so much, Fabian. I really appreciate it.
One last question.
Yeah.
Where can people reach you and find your repository? Could you maybe show something of that?
That will be later in the video description, or you can go into shared notes. There's a link to my GitHub page and also a link to how you can reach me over XMPP.